Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Hi again, and welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth with your host, Peter Robbins, and that is me. If you are watching or listening, it is on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. You can watch or listen for the next 24 or so hours on YouTube at no cost. You can subscribe to KGRA at a very modest amount per month or year. And if you use my name, Peter, as your code when you register to subscribe, you will get a full 30% off. Tonight's monologue is the kind of monologue that I'm very wistful about and never welcome doing. I will tell you this, though, that it is heavily plagiarized, so you know in advance, from encyclopedia.com and the death notice posted by the Montgomery Stryker Funeral Home in Laramie, Wyoming. A week ago today, the UFO research community lost one of its true shining lights and heroes. Ronald Leo Sprinkle, psychologist and researcher of UFO contactee experiences, passed away peacefully on November 15th at the age of 91 in Laramie, Wyoming. Leo was born on August 31st, 1930 in Rocky Ford, Colorado. He received his bachelor's and master's degree, hold it one second here, from the University of Colorado, my sister's alma mater, and completed his doctorate in counseling psychology at the University of Missouri. After 3 years in the administrative department at the University of North Dakota, Leo moved to University of Wyoming, where he remained until his retirement in 1989. Leo traced his interest in the UFO subject to a sighting he had in 1949. He and his wife also had a sighting in 1956. During the years immediately following the completion of his formal education, he conducted several studies, including an early survey of the members of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena and an initial study of people who had experienced extraterrestrial encounters, both contactees and abductees. He served as a psychological consultant for the Condon Report in 1969 on UFOs, which led to further work on several abduction cases through the 1970s. Sprinkle is best known, however, for the annual conferences he had organized for UFO contactees each summer since 1980. For a number of years, claiming friendly contact with entities associated with flying saucers, as they were originally referred to. Unlike most ufologists, Leo did not dismiss them. In contrast, he responded to these individuals sympathetically. The conferences, sponsored by the Institute for UFO Contactee Studies, brought many of these individuals to the university and provided them with an open forum to tell their stories in a non-judgmental environment. As the number of abduction reports increased in the late 1980s, which is about when I met him, abductees were welcomed to the summer conference as well. Eventually, Sprinkle identified himself as a contactee. He also concluded that UFO activity was part of a larger program of what he termed cosmic consciousness conditioning. His view was that the UFO entities, whatever one thinks of them as being from outer space or another dimension, were attempting to move humanity into a better understanding of themselves as cosmic citizens. Leo and his wife, Marilyn, made Laramie their home and raised 4 children there. After retiring from UW, Leo continued in private practice. He studied reincarnation and past life regression and published a book. Well, he published several actually, but published a book, Soil Samples, in 1999. A UFO researcher of international fame, he published over 50 articles, wrote forewords for other researchers' books, and was interviewed on many national and international TV and radio shows. Leo, I'm obviously reading from a script here, but I love this guy. He was empathetic and compassionate to the nth degree. People suffering everything from test anxiety to suicidal behavior sought his counsel, and his most ardent supporters were those who knew him personally. A mix of intellectualism, spirituality, and great good humor defined his style, and it was authenticated by his personal integrity and limitless energy. He was a prolific writer of clever limericks, and in his 80s dominated Wyoming's senior Olympics in swimming, track, and basketball. Way to go, Leo. He was a beloved son, brother, husband, father, uncle, grandfather, and mentor to many. He is survived by his sister, his wife, Marilyn, sons Nelson, Eric, Matt, daughter Kirsten, and 6 grandchildren. The last time I saw Leo was in 2015 in Arizona, when we spent a wonderful couple of days together at Travis Walton's Skyfire Summit, marking the 40th anniversary of the Walton Experience. Mostly what we did was tell each other stories and laugh our asses off. He had a brilliant sense of humor, and I first met him when he came to New York and spent time with Bud Hopkins. And then, as is the case for many of us in the field, you know, you see each other at conferences and always try to find some time together. This is how I will always remember Leo. And I don't think we'll see his likes again, but he set the bar very high, not just in his ethics, but in his empathy, his kindness, and his seriousness about the work, not to mention the fact that as a mental health professional, a PhD psychologist, he risked his career and his reputation by associating himself with the subject early on. So bless your heart, Leo. We will miss you and have a great journey. That said, tonight's guest, David Marler, has had a lifelong interest in the UFO subject and has actively investigated and researched it for 31 years. He joined the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, in 1990 as a field investigator trainee. Since then, he has served as a field investigator, state section director, as well as Illinois state director. During his tenure with MUFON, he had conducted numerous investigations into alleged UFO sightings and related experiences. He has discussed the subject of UFOs on numerous radio and television programs all over this country. He's also been on many independent documentaries in various countries over the years. He was seen in the Australian 7 News Spotlight show, The Phenomenon, with mainstream journalist Ross Cothalt. He also has appeared on live Russian TV news, RTVI, to discuss the UFO subject. He has established himself as an internationally recognized UFO researcher, and I may add, an absolutely brilliant presenter. Very few people hold the bar to the same level that David does in his presentations at conferences and regional groups and MUFON groups. He has one of the largest personal libraries of UFO books, journals, magazines, newspapers, microfilms, audio recordings, and case files from around the world that cover the last 75 years. I would say he probably has the largest such collection in private hands in the United States. With this, he has been examining the detailed history of UFO sighting reports and related patterns, and also making this extraordinary database available to colleagues both here and abroad. Evidence of his historical research is in his acclaimed book, Triangular UFOs, An Estimate of the Situation. Here, he has provided a comprehensive analysis of triangular UFOs. He has collected, collated, and analyzed hundreds of reports. In the process, he has created a detailed profile of these objects and written a rich narrative of their history. In November of last year, he became the recipient of the world's single largest historical collection of UFO case files in the world. These files included the historic NICAP and CUFOS case files, in addition to Dr. Hynek's original Project Blue Book files. Due to his role as curator of these files and his track record of credible historical research, he was offered the rare invitation of serving as a full board member with Dr. J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies, or CUFOS. David willingly accepted this invitation and now serves in that role as their official archivist. David received his Bachelor's of Science degree in psychology from Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. He received his certification in hypnotherapy from Motton and Johnson Institute of Hypnosis in St. Louis, Missouri. He is a registered polysomnographic technician, and please correct me when you come on, David, and assisted in diagnosing and treating patients that suffered from various sleep disorders for several years at a major St. Louis-based medical facility. He also worked for a global medical equipment company for 13 years. David currently works in the healthcare field for a large New Mexico-based hospital network and resides in the Albuquerque, New Mexico area with his wife and children and an awful lot of UFO material. David Marler, welcome to Meanwhile here on Earth.
Great to be with you, Peter. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. It's been great fun preparing for this show and knowing that wherever we are by the time, what I'll laughingly say, completed, that we will not have completed it. And paraphrase Arnold Schwarzenegger, you will be back. But David, let's start at the beginning. And for me, the beginning is, well, say about here. Asking the rhetorical question, who is this baby?
Yeah, that's a very young David Marler. One of the few photos before I became interested in the UFO subject, actually. Contrary to public opinion, my interest in UFOs didn't develop in utero. It was after I was born.
Okay, so you only had a very small library of little books at the time.
Yes, the little golden books of ufology.
Where were you born?
Born in Belleville, Illinois, in southern Illinois, and was raised in a very small town, which was a suburb of the St. Louis, Missouri area, as I always like to say, just on the other side of the Mississippi River, a little town called Fairmont City, population around 2,400 people back then. Boy. And but it was a great experience. I always like to say I had the virtue of having exposure to both worlds. I was close to a major city, but still really grew up within that small hometown environment.
It's beautiful. You had any siblings, David?
I do, actually. I had five. My oldest brother was actually a twin. His twin died shortly after birth in the late 40s. And then, unfortunately, we lost my oldest brother to Alzheimer's. And then that was shortly after my father had actually passed away from Alzheimer's. So we are very familiar with that disease, unfortunately, in our family. But I do have two older brothers that are still alive. One just got over COVID, thank goodness. And then I have an older sister as well. And so I was the youngest of the family. I am, as the photo demonstrates, I was the baby of the family. And admittedly was not planned, as my mother has, finally conceded that I was the oops baby. So there's a separation of years. When most people talk about their siblings, you envision growing up in a house together, playing together. And that really wasn't the case in my instance, Peter. Most of my siblings, with the exception of one, my brother that's closest to me in age, 9 years older, they were already married, moved out of the house. And so really, compared to most people with fond memories, as I know you have of siblings, I don't have those memories of playing as children. They were more almost like aunts and uncles in a sense.
Do you remember as a little boy playing at their retirement parties?
Yes. Well, some of them just recently retired. Some of them are still working. And but yeah, so it was just, I always like to kind of clarify that, because you envision, in the same, sandbox playing with your siblings. And that really wasn't the case. My one brother, who's 9 years older than me, he actually moved out when he was 18, got married right out of high school. So really, I only have one sibling that I have memories with under the same roof.
Yeah. David, tell me a little about your parents. Was your mom a traditional home mom, or was she working, or just your dad?
Yeah, at the risk of embarrassing myself, I always tell people, and I know this probably falls on deaf ears to some of the younger generation out there. I always tell people I was the Leave It to Beaver family. We quite literally had a white picket fence around our yard.
I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not making this up. We had a white picket fence around our yard. We, again, small town environment that I grew up in, which I, really looking back on it, I have no complaints. I'm really glad I grew up in that environment. And even though it was a small town, I might add that it was a melting pot of different ethnicities, which I think is a great education when you're exposed to other cultures, other people, as opposed to just this homogenized, whether it be white, black, brown, it doesn't matter. I think it's great when you're exposed to that at an early age, because I really think
wonderful in a small town to have that environment.
Absolutely.
That's not usually the case in America.
Absolutely, yeah. There was a chemical plant there, and they actually hired a lot of migrant workers, and so that's what brought in a lot of different ethnicities to that area. But like I said, Leave It to Beaver. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. My father went to work, so June and Ward Cleaver, and I guess that makes me the Beaver. So being the youngest sibling at home, right? But again, it was a great environment. As I always like to joke, and any Catholics that are listening will get the joke. When people ask me, what religion are you? I always like to say, I'm a recovering Catholic. And if you're Catholic, you get the joke. As I like to say, I still feel guilty for not doing anything.
Pax vobiscum. 4 Hail Marys and 1 Our Father.
Right.
And I'm Jewish.
Yeah.
When you mastered reading, at about what age was that, when you could actually, crack a book, moving into the adult world of reading? And what kind of reading did you gravitate to as a young person?
Well, early on, my fondest memories or earliest memories are reading comic books. I was fascinated with comic books, and I know, in the literary world, although I think things have changed in recent years.
Now it's okay again, graphic novels.
Exactly.
But, you and I grew up with Superman, Batman,
Absolutely.
Archie, go down the great pantheon of the golden age there.
And, for all its criticisms, to comic books back in the day, it is a bridge into that world of literature.
Sure
and, in fact, I still have many of the comics that I grew up with as a child, which I'm now sharing with my stepdaughters and showing them, because now they're watching all of these characters that you and I imagined in our minds. And now, of course, the Avengers and Iron Man and Spider-Man are on the big screen. So
right.
I'm trying to show them how I experience these characters versus how they experience them.
Yeah,
but
on the screen as opposed to in the theater of your mind.
Absolutely. And so that was my earliest introduction, comic books, and then into small novels. I have to tell you, I used to be very big into science fiction when I was younger. But ironically enough, as I get older, I'm much more interested in science fact than science fiction.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of interesting. I kind of liken it to children. They have a propensity for having a sweet tooth. But as we get older, we don't necessarily crave the sweets as much as we used to. And I find that that's how I am with science fiction and science fact. Less interested in science fiction today and much more interested in science fact. And of course, right now with science, we're living in an extraordinary time.
Yeah. Before we go any further, I don't want us and our viewers to miss this image. No, that one.
Oh, yes.
Total sporty thing. You got the bottle off to the side. You're a happening kind of guy.
Yeah, and ironically enough, I still have a propensity for wearing hats, Peter. So that was a precursor of things to come.
David, the world of film and movies, for those of us a certain generation, it either started on television or in the local movie theater. And if in the theater, on your own or with a small group of friends or with your parents, how were you introduced to the world of film?
It would definitely be through television, through the medium of television that I was first introduced to that. And of course, growing up in really, I was born in 1968, but growing up admittedly in the 1970s. And I know you and I have talked about this before. One of my favorite comedies that I loved to watch, comedy troupes, I should say, were the Marx Brothers. Absolutely, still to this day, love the Marx Brothers, Abbott and Costello, some of the classics, from the 20s, 30s, 40s that I think are still timeless today.
I couldn't agree with you more. My literary agent's father represented Abbott and Costello, and he told me some wonderful stories of meeting them. Well, meeting Lou Costello when he was 12 years old. But for me, you say the name Marx Brothers. My grandmother not only grew up in the same neighborhood they did, called Germantown in the East 80s in New York City, but she knew them all as kids, and she was friends with their mother and spent some time with them once they became famous and would visit New York. That's a whole nother show right there. But
unbelievable.
They were genius anarchist comics, and a lot of their routines were worked out as riffs on the street. And the other thing is, after like 4 films, creative control was taken away from them. The 4 first films are maniac delights, and then increasingly they're subdued and doing kind of almost cliched impressions of themselves, but they still tear me up. By the time you were in junior high school or, high school at the latest, did you have an idea of what you wanted to be besides the world's major UFO archivist?
Yeah, well, that certainly wasn't on the radar at the time, I can tell you. Actually, in junior high as well as high school, I envisioned myself to be a writer, which is ironic because I actually drifted from that idea later. I started taking courses in psychology in high school my senior year, and was really fascinated with just trying to understand human behavior. And so then when I went off to college, I decided I wanted to pursue that. I had a psychology major, sociology minor, just really finding that as I got older, was really trying to understand and appreciate human behavior, which, as you will concede, being in the UFO field, you truly get to see the Whitman sampler of personalities and psychologies, belief systems. It's a really interesting insight into the human psychology studying the UFO field.
It sure is. And was there an event or a book or a movie or an article or an experience that first captured your interest about this subject of UFOs, now more and more known as UAPs?
Absolutely. Very, very clearly. And I note this in my book. Back in 1973, I was 5 years old, again, living in the suburbs of St. Louis, and splashed all over the front page newspaper articles at the time, as well as on television news, I might add. They were covering a series of UFO sightings in an area called Piedmont, Missouri, which is about 2 hours, 2.5 hours to the south of St. Louis. And my family, my father's family, were born and raised there. That's where my father originated from. And in fact, the link, if you can point to a link with regard to my father and myself to this series of sightings, the first in a series of UFO sightings at the time, starting in the spring that year, was the basketball team coming home from losing a basketball game in the neighboring town. And one of the adult witnesses' name was Reggie Bone. And he was splashed all over the newspapers, citing that he and the basketball team had seen unusual lights. And my father, I remember very vividly, even though I was young, my father said, if Reggie said he saw something, you can take that to the bank. Wow. And the reason he said that is he grew up in that area and Reggie was one of his best friends.
Got it.
So there was that link. And admittedly, being 5 years old, I still remember my sister, my brothers, and my father piling in the old Chevy to drive down on weekends to Piedmont to quote unquote look for UFOs.
No kidding.
As many people were doing at the time from St. Louis, because again, they were seeing this on the news, reading the newspaper. People are driving down thinking, well, I want to see what this is all about. My father and family were no different. And as I always like to say, I was 5 years old, so I was relegated to staying home with my mom, who had as much in the way of disinterest in UFOs as my father had interest in it. And so they went down multiple times that spring and that summer. They did not see anything. However, my father's aunt and uncle, who lived down there for many, many decades, had seen lights, had seen objects, and they knew many of the people, including law enforcement, that had witnessed things down there at the time. And so that was my first exposure to hearing the term UFO. And as you can imagine, the enthusiasm, the contagious enthusiasm with my father loading up the binoculars. I remember the binoculars, the thermoses of coffee going in the car, and then they were traipsing down there. And again, they didn't see anything, but they did come back with intriguing stories of people they had talked to that had claimed to have seen things. And so that was really my first introduction into the UFO subject.
I have to tell you, and I know you have similar experiences of people telling you how they got involved. It's a question I routinely ask for obvious reasons on this show. And, there's only so many reasons. But this permutation is completely new to me. To not have been introduced to the subject at such a young age, but have it as a clear memory and the enthusiasm of the grown-ups and siblings responding the way that they did. That's one for the books as far as I'm concerned.
And my father had an interest in UFOs and things paranormal, more so UFOs. And at the time, as you probably recall, Peter, there was a lot in the media at the time in the 70s, especially 73, which beyond Piedmont was a pivotal year, a wave of sightings across the country. And I remember growing up with my father watching Leonard Nimoy on the episodes of In Search of. And so Bermuda Triangle, UFOs, we always talked about that. And to give my father credit, he always, I think, walked a fine line. He always imparted to me, be open-minded but skeptical. And those are my father's words, and I've really tried to adhere to those principles even today. That's why I don't go down, like many researchers, down the conspiracy rabbit hole.
Yes.
I don't go down the rabbit hole of belief.
Yes.
I try to look at the information objectively, share it with individuals. And, as I've often said, I always get compliments because people will come up to me at conferences and say, I love the fact that you cite your resources. Because quite often many researchers, or pseudo researchers, as I like to call them, are standing at the dais at these events and they're spouting the most ludicrous stuff.
And where does that come from?
Exactly. You have to question, as a logical, educated person, where are they pulling this information from? And if they can't tell you, then you need to run the other way. And so the one thing I try to do is, for two reasons, really. One, to validate what I'm saying, but also I hope in conducting lectures across the country, talking logically and coherently about this material, that if you're interested in what I'm saying, here's the references. Please take what I've done and take it to the next level. I hope that I can be an inspiration for people to continue that research.
That's so well said. And let's remember, when you use the word skeptic, we all have to be skeptics.
Absolutely.
And that applies in particular to people like you and I. I remember a certain point in my years of working as Bud Hopkins' assistant, where not even so much based on hearing extraordinary accounts from believable people, often backed up by family or witnesses in the neighborhood or friends. But the physical evidence most people just aren't familiar with in the abduction field.
Exactly.
That you hit a point, and again, I got involved from the day that my sister told me about her abduction-related memories. And at a certain point, I realized, with all of this information and being a fly on the wall of the most extraordinary researcher at the most remarkable time, that the phrase for me was, I no longer had the luxury of disbelief. And when people say, do you believe? and then whatever the sentence is. And, I always try to be kind and civil. But sometimes it's like ask me if I believe in the chair that I'm sitting in.
Yeah.
Belief doesn't enter into this. It
Yeah.
is or it isn't. And we're doing our best to either establish or dismiss the accounts. So we all need to be skeptics. It's a good thing. However, debunker is another thing. And it's literally, it can't be, therefore it isn't, therefore it's something else. And
Absolutely.
my job is to pat you on the head and give you some pseudo-scientific explanation and send you on your way. And, Hopkins, who had a wicked sense of humor, I remember once just going off on, aren't they amazing? The debunkers are amazing. I mean, for me, they have me in awe. They know that truly anomalous UFOs are not real. And we should all have great respect for that.
Absolutely.
End of story. Yeah. What are we wasting our time on here?
Absolutely. Yeah, the word belief, I understand the connotation when people use it, when they come up to you and say, Peter, I believe in UFOs. It's almost like, look, I respect what you're doing. And, I'm on that same level with you as far as looking at the information, accepting it. But it does carry so much baggage, that term belief. And admittedly, there are those sad, dark chapters in UFO history, such as Heaven's Gate, where belief can take you to dangerous depths. And
there's those that are not familiar. There's reference here. He is talking about a cult that rose up, I guess, originally started in the 60s by Bo and Peep, their pseudonyms. After she passed, Marshall Applewhite changed his name from Bo to Doe, like P. Diddy, and started this cult. And in the 90s, they really flourished. And this actually hit me very personally at a certain point, because Hale-Bopp was the comet that came around in, I guess, 97. And he told his acolytes, more than 40 people that lived together communally in, I think, Southern California, that there was a mothership in the tail of this comet, and that this is what they had all been waiting for. And it was time to get ready to, the phrase was, drop their bodies so they could be assimilated into the mothership and head home. And I think 44 people committed mass suicide. I met Marshall Applewhite 1 week before that. He came to a conference in Gulf Breeze along with one of his followers, and Left at Eastgate had just come out at that time. And it was one of those moments that authors are, really struck by. You're at a table and there's an incredibly long line of people, and you're just trying to do your best to seem professional and say, would you like that signed or inscribed, when you really just want to say, thank you for buying my book. And this man steps in front of me, and he was all dressed in earth tones. He had the palest, bluest eyes, a zillion little lines in his face, close cropped hair, a little cap. And he just said in a monotone, sign, please. And the same thing for his fellow. I knew who it was. I had seen pictures of him. And this happened the next week. And that morning, that the news came out that they had all taken their lives, I was staying at Bud's and got a call from my publisher saying, you have to get here right now, Lower Broadway. I jumped on a train. What's up? He said, this is what's happened. We have been getting calls all morning from news people wanting to know what the connection is between our newly published book and this cult. I said, what do you mean? It said, well, Left at Eastgate, Heaven's Gate. And are you serious? And I took calls for hours from people. And the reason for that was several days. I'm taking some of your time, but this was a few days after Dan Rather had done a news story. CBS was the first news agency to get into the House. And on the coffee table in the communal living room. And I don't know who placed it there. It could have been them. It could have been the news people. But it was a copy of Timothy Good's Above Top Secret, Bud Hopkins' Intruders, Whitley Strieber's Communion, and Left at East Gate. And that's the book they seized on for that reason.
Oh, my goodness.
The first blast of international publicity that book had, a good omen of things to come. Moving right along. We have one. Yeah, please.
I just use that as an example that, belief, some people think it's harmless, it's fairly innocuous, but belief can lead to very serious outcomes. And, that's just one example, certainly one of the more grave examples in the UFO field. But I just always try to caution people, try to temper your belief with doses of reality.
It's true. And we live in a climate right now of an unprecedented climate in terms of this subject. We all know that since late 2017, the ridicule factor attached to taking UFOs seriously continues to diminish, especially noticeable in the sciences, in astronomy, in folks who have been involved in politics. But at the same time, we are at a golden age of this is what's happening, prove me wrong. I know that they are coming from this star system. They've been here for 347,000 years. This is why they're here. This is what powers their ships. This is what they have for breakfast. And prove me wrong. And it becomes the functional equivalent of a cult. Moving along, though, we have a wonderfully inordinate amount of images here that I want you to start taking us through. And let's see how we go.
There we go. So that's the Waltrip Motel in Piedmont, Missouri. And that was the sign as it looked in 73 when my father, my siblings were going down there. And just a little side note, Peter, right next to the Waltrip Motel, there was the Zephyr Cafe, which I believe is still there. And prior to this, and even after 73, because my family was down there, I used to go down there on summer vacation to fish on the Black River near Clearwater Lake and Dam with my father and my one brother. And so I have fond memories of the restaurant right next door to the Waltrip right there, the Zephyr Cafe. And there's Reggie.
There he is.
That's my father. Yeah, there you can see right on the front page of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And I remember my father seeing that and saying, if Reggie said he saw it, you can take it to the bank. So that's Reggie Bone. And that's my father. That was my father. That's probably back around the late 70s, early 80s, probably. And he was. My father and I had a great relationship. We were good friends, but obviously father-son as well. Yeah. But he was an inspiration, and I actually dedicated my book to his memory because truly, without him, I don't think I would have had that interest and wouldn't be here today.
Great face.
And that's my non-UFO family. That's my biological family.
Wow. This had to be a wedding. Looking at, is that your dad on the lower left?
No, that's actually my late brother on the lower left. My father had already passed at this point. This is 2006.
Absolutely sharp as a tack.
Yeah, it's my late brother sitting there in the front row with my mother. And then my brother Norm, my brother Bob, and my sister Cheryl there going left to right, and then myself on the end.
That's great.
Now this is a great photo that brings back memories. I got involved in 1990. Around 1991, there was a wave of UFO sightings, cattle mutilations that seemed to be in and around the Springfield, Missouri area. And there's still activity to this day. I still keep in touch with some of the researchers that are down there, but there was a lot of activity going on circa 1991 to 1994, especially. And that's one of the many trips we took down there. I believe this is 92 or 93, maybe. And that's my dear friends, Dwayne and Susan Bedell on the left-hand side. And then my dear friend, Tom Eckhart on the right. And we were going down from St. Louis, making multiple visits and camping out. I can't tell you how many hundreds of hours we sat. I mean, quite literally, Peter, our attitude was, it's one thing to read books, but if there's UFO sightings, if there's cattle mutilations, our attitude was, where was the cow found? It was found in this field. Okay, we're camping out here the next 3 nights.
Wow.
I mean, we always looked at it very pragmatically, and I still do, looking at UFO investigation. If there's crimes taking place and you're a police officer and you want to catch the culprits, where do you go? Where the crimes are taking place. You stake out, you look for it, you set up bait cars, whatever you need to do to try to find out what's going on. And so we tried to immerse ourselves and put us in the area where these things were taking place. I will tell you, we had wonderful cooperation on the part of local law enforcement, Missouri Highway Patrol. Good. We were talking to Missouri Highway Patrol officers who had seen these balls of light moving up and over and around the trees. In addition to that, we were working with, at the time, Webster County Sheriff's Department. We actually went in because we knew, based on the newspaper accounts, that they were trying to understand what was going on. So we actually went in and did an ad hoc presentation for then Sheriff Wells was his name, and gave him pictures and a portfolio of other cases across the country with basically an outline of, these are the characteristics that you often see with these cases. Yeah. He readily accepted that, and he said, now, are you boys going to be driving around like you had mentioned, like you did the night before? And we said, yes, we are. We're going to be camped out. We're going to be on this county road. We're going to be going over here. And it was great, Peter. He said, you know what? Give me the make, model of your vehicle. Give me the license plate. I'll put a memo out to all the officers tonight, so if they see you on the roadside, they know you're working with us.
Wow.
Yeah. So over the years, I've had some wonderful interactions with law enforcement regarding the subject.
You remind me, Bill, I'm suddenly getting an echo. Maybe I'm just the only one that can hear it, and it just disappeared. Don't mind me. You remind me that when you enter this research, there are a number of hyper-specialty areas, working in libraries and archives, being out in the field, and working with individuals, witnesses, and even more sensitive work, experiencers and abductees. Many people they shine at one or two of them, but they're not really either into or have the sensitivity or the predisposition for other areas of work. One of the things I admire about you is that you really are so comfortable in and so productive in all of those areas. I mean, people use the phrase working in the field. You capture it about as literally as it can be. And it reminds me, this next picture here, you guys, this was a serious team.
Oh yeah, that was my Illinois State Director MUFON days. That was late 90s, early 2000s when I was driving around with my sign on my vehicle and trying to get interest and membership up. And we had an incredible Illinois MUFON team at that time. I still am good friends with most, if not all of them. Unfortunately, one just recently passed away. I believe it's been just about a month now. His name was Paul Russell. I want to just give him a shout out. Wonderful gentleman from Pekin, Illinois. And Paul was as dedicated as they come, and one of the nicest men you could ever meet. And he was definitely an integral part of our statewide investigative team. But that's when I was hosting monthly meetings and trying to educate the public as best we could at the time, and hosting various lectures and events. And I communicate with many state directors today, and they'll bemoan the fact that, well, we're trying to find a speaker for our next meeting, or we're trying to get membership up, or we're trying to raise money. And I'm just having flashbacks to when I was state director. I'm like, yes, I was a state director for about 8 years. I know the pain.
And what's Paul's full name?
Paul Russell.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll remember that.
Yeah, I'm actually, looks like I'm working on the Illinois MUFON website, very early internet days there, but that was at my home in Edwardsville, Illinois, when I was living there. And I can even see my old fax machine, which is hilarious looking back on that. But those were the early days. But to your point, admittedly, Peter, when I was younger, I did a lot more field work. I find that as I'm getting older, I enjoy the creature comforts more of having my coffee and sitting in my comfortable chair going through UFO case files. But what you touch on, it is true, though, that all of these elements are important, and I focused a lot more now on historical research, but that doesn't mean that outshines what MUFON investigators are doing in the field, collecting current reports.
Not at all.
All of it's important.
Yeah. And also, at a certain point, you made a conscious or unconscious decision to begin to build a serious archive and have created for yourself a world unto itself that you can certainly easily, happily, and with great satisfaction spend the rest of a very long natural life working on, developing, refining, organizing, and people should know at some point in the future, 180 years from now, when you pass as one of the oldest people ever to have lived, your archive will go to the University of New Mexico. And I think that's spectacular. Number one, that you already have this plan. Number two, that the University of New Mexico or individuals there are savvy enough and smart enough to know the importance of an archive like this, and that it should be housed in a respected academic climate. Can you tell us what offices or the library or what archive you are working with at the U of M?
Absolutely. It's the Southwest Special Collections Group is what they call it. And it's at the University of New Mexico, which is the largest research center in the state of New Mexico. And what's nice about Albuquerque, for those that haven't been here, is it's right in the middle of the state, essentially.
Yeah.
And it's right at the crossing of I-25 and I-40. And so it's right next to the airport as well for anybody that would fly in if they ever want to go to the University of New Mexico. It's literally just down the road from the airport. And I'm hoping that, in the future, people that fly into Albuquerque to go to Roswell, as many people do, they make the pilgrimage, if you will, if I can use that term, to go to Roswell. While they're in Albuquerque, I'm hoping that they might take advantage of their time and also be able to peruse the files that I've assembled.
I think that's wonderful.
And to your point, early on, when I first got involved in 1990, I rather naively thought I could go to the local library and check out books on UFOs. To my severe disappointment, the library,
gone by then.
They either didn't have any books or they may have had one or two at best. And it was literally this conscious decision. If I want a library of books, I'm going to have to start building my own. And much like what I see behind you, Peter, with your vast library, I slowly started building this. And then as many aging researchers saw what I was collecting, as they started getting up in age, or if they had passed, their widow or widower would contact me and say, would you like to have my husband or my wife's material? And I never thought it would get to the extent it has now. It's almost, I envision that little snowball that rolls down the hill. It keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That's the best analogy I can give you. Yeah. And as I like to say, it's not a static collection. There's always collections being donated. Philip Mantle, who I know you're familiar with. I just spoke with him earlier today, as a matter of fact, and I mentioned you. Philip Mantle will be donating his extensive case file collection and materials to my collection, probably starting the beginning of next year. And then Mr. Jan Aldrich has also indicated he's looking to send his material out here. So my wife and I, we've already put a new addition onto the house to house this material. But when we received the 15 or 16 file cabinets from the Center for UFO Studies, it immediately took up a lot of square footage. So we're looking for 2022 to actually take over our garage and essentially make that an archival room. We've already started getting shelving units, and we'll have an additional 323 square feet to house additional historical material in addition to what we have here.
David, something we won't get to until you return to the show in a few months is I understand for most people, they don't have the luxury of the space that you have. If they, love these kind of materials, a certain amount of it is available electronically. And of course, e-readers are amazing things. They have just, changed the way that people read. And I think it's wonderful. At the same time, You and I are very much analog guys in a digital world. And our love of books, I mean, I am, like you, a total bibliophile geek. And
Yes.
I remember when I got my first library card at 7 years old, and it's a kids' library in my village, and going down there, and my mom saying, you can spend some time here by yourself, and this is what you do, take out books, check them out, thinking, and she's upstairs at the adults library. This is amazing. Someday I am going to have my own library. And consciously, from the time I was a teenager, not obsessively, but beginning to select volumes that I thought I would want to have for the rest of my life.
Right.
Plus, you and I have libraries of books, surprise everybody, unrelated to the UFO subject. I know, but yes, we do. And
Yes.
when we return with you, one of the things I'm looking forward to is a tour of the archive and library room. And by then, your renovated garage, but also to peer into your non-UFO related library and talk books, because
Sure.
like a lot of folks now who are building vinyl collections and realize there is a very different sense to the audio, but also the whole culture of albums that we grew up with, and the
Absolutely.
graphics and the ideas on concept albums of like chapters in a book. These songs were put in this order for a particular reason, to produce a particular emotional or resonance result in you, the listener. And many of our viewers have grown up with, what do you mean you have to listen to songs in a certain order?
Right. Well, and it's interesting also, Peter, you talked about the e-readers and digital books. One thing I like to touch on, I always forget to mention this bit. Admittedly, having a physical archive is difficult for many people to get to, just based on mileage and costs to go there and actually do research. The ultimate goal, just so everyone understands, the ultimate goal long term is to have all this material digitized. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But to still have a physical repository, because again, we can scan J. Allen Hynek's original Project Blue Book documents, but there's nothing better than holding the actual documents in your hands.
No. And it's not like really a romantic thing as much as an historic thing. In the future, manuscripts for great books will not be typed out, double spaced, and then, handwritten and crossed out and have a coffee stain on it. It will simply be a white page with text on it that Absolutely. Is digitally stored. And I'm a bit wistful about that. I think you are too.
Well, I'm going to make a confession real quick that in addition to doing the archival work, the reason I do that is I'm a historian, and I don't think you can be a historian without being somewhat a sentimentalist. And so
I think you're absolutely right.
I cherish the original documents.
I was thinking today, being the anniversary of the murder of John F. Kennedy, which is something many of us will never forget, and on a certain level never really get over, because now that we're older, we understand the implications of what happened that day. And my post on my Facebook page today was essentially, we will always remember you, and what if this hadn't happened? And God, he was so young. And the reason I bring it up is because I guess as an archivist, one of the first things that I put aside and put into a large envelope and then into plastic years later was Newsday, one of the Long Island papers, the November 23rd issue with the assassination headline that I packed away as a boy, heartbroken, absolutely heartbroken. But yes, you are saving a piece of history for the future, and that's not a bad thing.
And that's, by the way, how I pitched the whole collection to UNM as far as their interest in preserving it. Back to your issue of belief, I avoided belief. I stated, as I stated in many of my lectures, whether you relegate UFOs to fact, fiction, or folklore, it's part of our history, it's part of our culture.
It is.
And I think we could all agree on that. And based on that, I feel it should be preserved. And UNM, in their wisdom, agreed.
It's one of the reasons also, when I first became of your work, I not only kind of embraced it, but identified with it, because both of us very naturally have done a lot of our best known and most respected work heavily couched in post-war 20th century history to give it a framework to hang on for folks that need that framework and should
Absolutely.
have it as well. For me, I see our jobs in a way as, not grand showmen and with great claims, but getting folks who might not otherwise come into a serious interest into the foyer. And then they can, if they like it in the foyer, they can walk into the living room.
Absolutely. And that is a picture. I am standing on the left is Mike Driscoll, still a very dear friend of mine.
Good.
He was one of my state section directors. And while I was visiting Moline, Illinois, he introduced me to the gentleman you see standing in the middle. That is retired police officer Bill Fisher from Moline, Illinois. And Bill had a Project Blue Book UFO sighting. He actually shot film footage, which I have, ironically enough, a copy from Project Blue Book headquarters at Wright-Patterson. I have a copy of the film footage that was in their files of Bill's 8mm film footage he shot.
Of course you do. And with that, we are going to take a quick break. This is Peter Robbins, and Meanwhile Here on Earth with my guest, David Marler. We will be back in a few minutes. Don't go away.
Hey members, the new KGRA-DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA-DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA-DB.
Welcome to the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. Here you'll find great new content, including the KGRA Classics, great shows from our archives. You'll be able to see the show times and information so you can see what show is currently on air. The on-air live button, so just go to this section and you'll be able to hear the show live with exceptional sound quality. We also have the Vault section. Make sure to subscribe to get access to great content and special features. We have the make content for our latest news and events, so make sure to sign up and you can be part of our forum. So make sure to check out the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. We look forward to seeing you there, and we hope that you enjoy the new website.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Families don't have to talk about everything, but they should talk about how to plan for an emergency. Get tips and resources to make your family's emergency plan.
And welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth with Peter Robbins and my guest, David Marler. Bring that man back here. David, just before we get rolling again, I just wanted to say a big hello to everybody in the chat room. I know I rarely refer to you guys, but most of the time I'm on the air, I am with that guest. Occasionally, if there's a long period where they're on, I'll check the post. But from doing a lot of shows, I see the sense of community that begins to develop for dedicated listeners and viewers to any show or podcast. And I'm almost a year into doing this. And I want you all to know how much I appreciate you being here with us. It means a lot to me. And I hope that if you enjoy the show, you will tell your friends and they will join us. But some of your comments and thoughts really touch me. You are a smart crew, and I also love your interactions that have not a damn thing to do with the show, but it's great to see how friendships are formed in this forum as well. Now, before we were so rudely interrupted by that commercial, let's move right on here. Who are these good folks?
Well, that is Moline, Illinois again. And again, my friend Mike Driscoll on the left. A great story here, Peter. Mike, his grandson at the time. Now, this was circa 2004, 2005, I believe. Mike had his grandson attending one of the elementary schools, and he brought this book home, which you see the teacher in the middle standing there, and it's Aliens and UFOs. It was a book to help develop critical reading skills for children. And when I went and did a lecture, that's one of the lectures I did at the school with Mike, we asked them, it's like, we're really amazed that you have a book on aliens and UFOs. And they said, we have such a difficult time getting children to read. So we have to find topics that are of interest to them. And so this is an official textbook. Years later, I actually secured a copy for my library here. But the kids loved UFOs. And I have to tell you, for an elementary level reading book, it really went into detail talking about the 1952 Washington, D.C. flyovers, as well as other classic cases. And at the very end of each chapter, it asked critical questions to make sure that the kids were reading it, and not only reading it, but absorbing the material. And so Mike's grandson at one of the classes during the time when they were first starting to break into this book said, well, my grandfather investigates UFOs for a group called MUFON. And one of the teachers said, well, do you think he'd be willing to come in and lecture? So he came in and did a lecture. The other teachers found out and wanted him to lecture to their kids.
I love it.
And he called me and he said, Dave, he goes, you're my state director. I need your help. He goes, they want me to do this again for several classes. And the neighboring school, who's using the same textbook, want me to come in. So we did a series of lectures for two elementary schools in Moline, Illinois.
That's great.
And ironically enough, I got to share this with you, Peter. I'm in there, and we had not only the students and the teacher that was obviously proctoring the class, we had other teachers that were not having class at the time standing in the back of the room so they could listen in on the UFO discussion. And I noticed one gentleman standing in the back, and it's one of those things where you see somebody and you recognize them, but you have no context for it. It's like, I know this gentleman from somewhere. He comes up after we presented, and we're talking very, very casually about the subject. And I asked him, I said, you look very familiar. And I said, where did you teach previously? Long story short, he was my freshman high school homeroom teacher. And years later, I'm meeting him in upstate Illinois, and I'm lecturing on UFOs. And it was after all these years we reconnected. It was just amazing to see him after all those years.
Again, just the comments about our friends in the chat room. At a certain point some years ago, I realized that the obsession that I and pretty much all of us get pulled into when this subject hits us like a giant sledgehammer of what is going on? What are these things? Who is in them? Why don't we know more about them? What are the implications for humanity? Why don't they just land already and make themselves known? And you obsess about them and their technology. And it's the most natural thing in the world. At a certain point, I realized, I don't know, some years in, when the obsession had become a very serious interest that I was focused on, but I could think about other things as well, still there. And then years of working with Bud, it was very focused on abduction and aspects of abduction. And then the people involved. And ultimately, I realize now at this point in my life, my work, all this stuff still interests me. But what interests me more is the human factor.
Absolutely.
And the extension of that is obviously if disclosure were to come, and everybody in the world was united by that one thought of we're not alone, that of course would have tremendous potential to change the destiny of humanity, and maybe a very healthy change it would be. But the greatest perk on this job is for people like you and me, the people we get to meet that we would have never met otherwise, the friendships that we begin to build, the colleagues that we learn from, occasionally the places that we get to travel to. And more for me, this is people oriented. I hope that we have, some breakthroughs that we find out about before we go on to whatever the hell comes after this. But at the same time, the impact on people is much more of a focus of mine at this point. And just watching, looking at these wonderful pictures of yours, it just brings home something that I reflect on regularly in terms of doing the show, for example. Everything that I've done up until this point for more than 40 years, this program is the natural extension of. And for every person that watches it, who is as involved as so many of the people in this chat room and chat rooms and shows like this all over the world, I hope there are at least two people that are new to the subject and starting to really feel comfortable and interested in learning more about it. This photo is a lecture where you are talking about your then newly published book?
Actually, this was prior to the publication of the book.
My. Okay.
I had lectured for a number of years on the subject. And this is actually at the Ozark UFO Conference in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, which I'll be speaking at next April. Again, I've spoken there on a number of occasions. My friend who has since, long since passed away, which was, I'm just drawing a complete blank on his name, Lou Farish. Sorry, Lou.
Oh, my
Lou
goodness. Well, the man who started the Ozarks Conference, you bet.
Started the conference, and then also for many years was the editor of the UFO News Clipping Service.
That's right. Oh, yeah. I subscribed to it starting late in the 70s. That was such a big deal.
And I had the honor of being the last editor for the last few years for the publication. But he offered me the opportunity to come and speak and talk about the historical research I was doing, which I always appreciated. But I would like to interject, just springboarding off what you just mentioned. If it wasn't for the podcasts like what we're doing right now, and if it wasn't for the conferences, we really don't have a vehicle to get information out to the general public that are interested. And so just, my thanks to you for providing this forum, because truly, otherwise we would be these stodgy little scholars hovering over our papers without the ability to be able to convey the information that we're finding. And so, as I always say, we have to have a vehicle for sharing the information. And so I want to thank you for the opportunity tonight, but also obviously the conferences across the country and across the world that truly allow us, like you said, to network with individuals. I sometimes feel guilty going to these conferences, being called a researcher and lecturer, because I don't know about you, but I think I can speak on behalf of you, because I know you and I have had many conversations over the years. I learn as much from the people that I meet as hopefully they gather from me in my lectures. We certainly don't go in pretending we have the answers. We have information, we have data, but that doesn't equate necessarily to having answers.
No, we are all in this together, from the best known to the least known. And I understand something of how the human ego functions. And if enough people, tell you you're terrific, well, I guess I am. But for me, again, I it's not that I don't have tolerances for people who think a great deal more of themselves than perhaps they should. But I don't kid myself anymore. A big part of what I miss about the conference circuit, which I am optimistic will really pick up again next year, especially if management of the pandemic is more under at hand, is the socializing of seeing old friends and colleagues that you don't see otherwise, and meeting new friends, and remembering those times when you were nobody in this work and you went up to somebody who you really respected, and they either it wasn't the rule for me, but occasionally just get brushed off because they're busy, or
Sure.
just, taken under their wing and sit down and let's talk. And
Absolutely.
it's life-changing.
Well, and I will add to that. I've stated many times to my audience that as I'm standing here on the stage, and you're sitting in the audience, remember, I was like you years ago when I first got involved, attending the lectures, listening to the lectures, taking notes. And then I just decided to become more actively involved, and then getting in not only to field work, as we alluded to earlier, but actual historical research. And then it just kind of develops on its own organically. And so I say that because by no means are we elitists, being the ones on the stage and you're in the audience. It's like, if you need coaching, you want guidance, if you want to do what I do, I'm more than happy to assist you.
Exactly.
The more brains that we can apply to this subject, the better off we are. And I think you mentioned at the beginning of the show, we have a lot of scientists that are now getting involved. Yeah. And it's an exciting time. As I've often said, we are not the best minds, and we are not the most highly trained minds on the planet. We need to get those individuals focused on the subject. And I think we're seeing that with the likes of Dr. Avi Loeb and others.
I was going to say, I was really honored last week when my friends at the great podcast and now live radio show on KGRA, Unidentified Celebrity Review, invited me to be an interviewer when they had Avi Loeb on as a guest last week. And boy, that is one sharp tack and such a breath of fresh air to see a respected major academic in it now. Again, very tightly focused and very data driven, as he should be, but healthier times are ahead in this, no question about it.
I feel that.
And here's one of my mentors, and one of the people I was referring to when I was a nobody. I wrote to Timothy Good, and he not only wrote me back on his beautiful stationery. One of the things I always loved about Tim, who is a man of great class as well as great scholarship, is that he would always sign letters. Look them up online, ladies and gentlemen. It's an old form of communication with a fountain pen. And I adore that file, and I consider Tim not just a uniquely qualified person in the work who has the courage to make claims that have gotten him in a certain amount of trouble, but who, in my brief contacts with former Ministry of Defense Chief of Staff Admiral Lord Peter Hill Norton, thought really most people, in the great majority of people involved in the world of UFOs, were complete wankers. And unless Tim said they were okay, if he gave his okay, he would deem it possible to speak with you. And I remember my first phone call with him, and, I was like, okay, you're clear.
Right.
But yeah, Timothy wrote one of the most important paradigm shifting books in the history of UFO studies that was then updated and revised. Above Top Secret became Beyond Top Secret, which was an expanded version. Lives in London, also a dual career. Tim, and he's pretty much retired now, is a violinist and violist. And I remember the first time that he was coming to New York in the area, the time that I knew him, in the, I guess, the early 90s. And I asked him if he had been to New York before. And he said in the nicest way possible, yes, about 50 times with the London Philharmonic. And I got it. And I will just add before we go on, when we finally did meet, it was great, looking forward to it. We had the date set, and he contacts me really at the last minute and says, I feel awful. I have work that I can't turn down. I have to work with an orchestra for several days scoring a film score for the Spanish film market. And then got back to me almost immediately and said, I have an idea. And the next thing I knew, I had been cleared to walk into the Abbey Road studios and wait for him in the commissary. at the table where the Beatles used to have tea during their recording breaks in the 60s, and walking that first aisle straight through to the commissary. A man was coming down the hallway with a very distinguished look, a tall man, angular face, with basically a handful of large reel-to-reel tapes. And as we walked by each other, he looked me in the eye and he said, "Hello." And I said, "Hello." He said, "I know that face from somewhere." It was Sir George Martin. And that was all Beatles anthology original material. And then Tim came out and took me and my co-author into, I think it's Studio 7. It's the largest studio. It's the one where they recorded All You Need Is Love. And there was a 50-piece orchestra, all of them with music stands with monitors set in them and a couch. And I got to, and then we chatted a bit for the first time. But I'm so glad you have gotten to spend time with Tim.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, and I was just going to mention, and this is a perfect picture to segue, that's actually me reviewing an issue of the UFO News Clipping Service when I was the editor. And I was just about to mention, so this is perfect timing, that my main conduit for foreign news clippings was Timothy. Timothy would send me monthly news clippings from the UK as well as other countries. And he was very instrumental in assisting me. And I would always credit him as our kind of foreign lead, if you will, our foreign news lead.
And let's talk about this book.
Yeah. I have to say that when the book came out, it definitely met with a great response, very positive response. But I was just remarking to my wife the other day that, and I think this is in large part due to, I think, what you touched on during the introduction, Peter. I've done some international coverage working with Ross Coulthart in Australia, as well as some other productions. And, of course, James Fox with his Unidentified documentary series. But it seems like the book has had just a resurgence of interest in the UFO community, and I think really in general. And I think that's in large part due to some of the media coverage. But it just seems like it has staying power because I wrote this book with the idea to get the information out there. And by that, I mean the historical data that I had accumulated up until 2012 when I started writing the book. The book came out in 2013. But again, I was rather naive, never having written a book. And ironically enough, going back to what we described earlier, when I was in high school, I wanted to be a journalist and write. Then I forgot about it. And then fast forward decades later, here I am actually writing a book. So it's kind of interesting that kind of finally came around and actually happened. But what I was not expecting, Peter, and I don't often talk about this, is the response that I received. I still get emails from people. I've received letters over the years from individuals contacting me saying for years, in fact, there was one lady, I'll just mention her first name. I don't want to mention her last. Her name is Judy. And shortly after this book came out, within 2 to 3 months, I would say, she was one of the first people to write to me via email, and a very heartfelt email. And suffice it to say, emails led to many phone calls. Judy used a term that I've heard many times from individuals who have read my book. They said, "You validated my sighting." She said, for years, friends and family that didn't share my experience thought I was crazy, or when I would bring it up, they would laugh. And she would state that, when I read your book, all of those snide remarks, all of those comments went by the wayside because you gave me validation, because here is an international historical collection of reports of the same thing that I saw back in the 1980s, and that now I realize other people have seen and have been documented. And as an author, that's a word that, really resonates with you when you get that not only did I appreciate your work, but you validated my sighting. You gave me validation.
Yeah. Also, I must say, as a New Yorker, when the triangular shaped incursions started to occur 82 or so in the Westchester area of New York City. And Bill, is it possible for you to bring in David again, full half screen? There was a town meeting. Westchester is a county just north of Manhattan. on a weekend. I think it was a Saturday, and it was held at the high school in their auditorium. And that place was packed. It was, sociologically and culturally an event I'll never forget, as well as in the world of UFO study history. It was one person after another, local people getting up on that stage and saying, I saw this, my family saw this. And it was also the beginning of the video recorder revolution. So a lot of people were filming these things. And, an office worker would come up, talk about what they had seen. A farmer would come and talk about the animal reactions and so on. And that was the point at which the whole triangular UFO phenomena captured my imagination to such a degree that it's never really let go. And that question is, are they ours? Are they theirs? No, wait. They're probably ones that are ours and ones that are theirs based on our technology, etc. It's still one of the most fascinating focused areas of craft study, so to say.
Yeah, and it's an impressive wave of sightings that occurred in the Westchester area. And of course, our mutual friend Lee Spiegel also had a sighting of a triangle back in 75.
Did he ever? Yeah.
And so, these things have been, definitely consistent in the literature, in the reporting worldwide.
Yeah.
And that was really what launched my interest, that and the fact I investigated a very similar set of sightings that occurred January 5th, 2000 in Southern Illinois, where these police officers were in radio contact as they're looking at this object. And, as I always like to characterize these triangles, Peter, I call these unambiguous UFO sightings. We're not talking about a little point of light in the sky that looks like a satellite just drifting overhead at a distance. These things are definitely leave. And you mentioned this earlier. You talked about the human element associated with these encounters. I've talked to witnesses that were literally in tears as they're reliving the sighting. And due to the sheer size, due to the absence of sound and low altitude flight, a number of separate witnesses have all told me very emotionally, we at first were in awe and then we were intimidated, because once the initial shock wore off, then your mind starts working. And our thought was, everything that we've seen in the air has some type of noise. Even a blimp has noise. This thing was completely silent. We were out in the country. If there was any noise emanating from it, we would have heard it. But the realization quickly dawned on us. Nothing we know of can float in the air without making some type of noise. And then the sheer size, it definitely is intimidating for a lot of these witnesses when they experience these things. And again, just like all other UFO reports, every demographic, all walks of life, people I've interviewed, hundreds of reports pouring in worldwide. And what's interesting is the early accounts, and you touched on this, Peter, that some of the more recent ones, in other words, people seeing a triangle, maybe high altitude, could easily be the next evolution in stealth technology. But when we look back to the 1940s, 50s, and as I'm delving into the file cabinets immediately to my right, the historic nightcap reports, there is a huge explosion of sightings of triangles in the 1960s, definitely predating stealth technology. And without going down, these, as I like to call them, revisionist history belief systems, that it's Nazi technology, the Nazis survived and they have all this technology. I don't subscribe to that. But following traditional aviation history, these things do not conform or comport with any type of aircraft that we had at the time, both in description, flight dynamics, speed, and rates of acceleration from a dead stop.
If you work long enough, you get blasé about all this. You don't. If you're honest with yourself, it still blows my mind that an object of this appreciable size can hover without a sound. And it's, I still have yet to completely wrap my mind around it, and how the same questions I asked myself over 40 years ago, I'm still asking myself. I don't think that's a bad thing. in terms of the theories on how these function, what powers them, the basic questions, once again, the fact that you have focused in on this particular moment in UFO dynamics, for me, gives one more important volume for any library. And we know the internet is a wonder, and there's a great deal of valuable information that can be had on it. But there is something about the value of a book that has a bibliography, that has an index, that has stood the test of time as a guide and a research asset, that a claim, no matter how grandiose, or an image or footage that has not been analyzed or does not have witnesses who will give you the time, the circumstances, the optics that they were captured with.
Right.
And
I think something important with the triangles is this, that to your point, it's just a narrative. People can say they saw a triangular UFO, but what's important is this. When we look at, say, 1964, just one example, I have a number of triangle reports from 1964 documented in the NICAP CUFOS case file collection. These reports were documented in 1964. Yeah. These aren't retrospects where people are just telling me, well, in 1964, I saw that. Certainly I get those reports, Peter, but it's very important to have the original signed and dated original copy from 1964. And the reason I say that, in 1964, even in the UFO community, for the most part, with rare exception, no one was talking triangles. So the point I'm making is, for the skeptics out there that say, well, these people are just orchestrating these stories just to basically feed UFO believers and their belief systems. If you wanted to concoct a story, you're going to shape it along a narrative that most people are going to believe in 1964, namely a 30-foot silver disc with a little dome on top. In general, people weren't talking triangles. So why would they concoct a story like that? And then through the lens of history, looking through that lens of history, we can find these sketches, as I'm putting together in a new presentation for next year, where you can see the sketches people were drawing in 64, 65, 66, and they're eerily similar to what's become prevalent today.
David, I don't do this often, but Steve Humphrey in our chat room asks a very good question, maybe one that's challenging to answer, but do you, after all these years and all this work, have a favorite UFO, UAP case, one that you still reflect back on that holds your interest, whatever reason? Is there one outstanding?
There really isn't, because it's almost like saying, who's your favorite child, right? You love each one in their own separate way, and each one has their strengths and has their weaknesses. It's a great question. I would just say, in taking just a temporary departure from triangles, I'm extremely fascinated with the Battle of LA incident, which I've done a lot of historical research on.
Yes.
I think I've done probably the lion's share of research on that. I have numerous original front page newspaper headlines on this, as well as the government documents that Barry Greenwood, my friend and colleague, secured back in the late 70s.
One of the great archivists himself.
Absolutely. In fact, Barry and Jan Aldrich were here in September for 2 weeks doing scanning of the case files. So,
for those viewers or listeners who are not familiar with the this case that David is referring to, about 80 days after Pearl Harbor, a glowing disc came in over the Los Angeles area. It was understandably assumed, because it did not identify itself, that it might well be some kind of Japanese phenomena or weapon. And shore batteries opened up on it, and something like 1,600 howitzer rounds were expended on it. No hits that we're aware of. 2 or 3 people died either from a coronary or, you'd know better than I, David, some associated situation.
It was heart attacks and vehicular accidents. Some people were trying to drive during the blackout and unfortunately collided with various objects.
And we now know, as well as we can know, from Japanese-related documentation of the time in their military archives, that there was no such thing sent over there, there is that extraordinary photograph. It's a news photograph capturing the object in floodlights that would have been used, to spot enemy aircraft. And again, it's a Ben-Day photograph made up of tiny little dots. It's a newspaper technique photograph. But at the same time, it is a disc-shaped phenomena. And it's just such an anomaly.
Right over here, in fact, right there, framed, you can't see it. This will be for the next show, Peter.
Yes.
I have an original copy from the Associated Press dated February 25th, 1942, the morning of the incident. And to your point, it does show an elliptical object. Many people see a saucer with a dome on top, but based on my analysis, not the photo that I have, but the one, it's an ellipse, exactly. And there's some really interesting characteristics associated with that in conjunction with the searchlights. But the one thing I like to point out, just real quick, we can move on. But what I found fascinating in my research, because I went in very objectively, maybe this is something, maybe it's not, maybe it was hysteria. But there's two elements that I like to touch on. We can remove the human component for a moment. In other words, perception, human perception.
Right.
Because there were 3 separate radars based on Barry Greenwood's government documents that were tracking an inbound unknown target for 120 miles, coming in from the northwest, heading southeast towards the Los Angeles coastline. This immediately preceded the air raid alert and the blackout, which then followed the visual sighting of this object, which, again, it's one thing to say you saw it, but we have a photograph of the object. So we have objective data in the form of radar, 3 radar systems, and a photograph. So this takes it outside the realm of jittery war nerves. As I tell my audience, jittery war nerves can't be tracked on radar, and jittery war nerves can't be photographed.
And this is one of the things that makes Barry, for those of us who know his extraordinary track record and respect his level of scholarship and consistency, where that quiet putting together of the pieces, a document, a newspaper article, a photograph, an analysis of the photograph, and a timeline based on them all, and coming up with something that, in a scholarly way, just takes the top of your head off. This is so exciting.
And to be clear, we're not saying it's extraterrestrial. All we can say is it's unknown, because to your point, in my research, we definitively ruled out Japanese because, to your point, there was an official declaration at the end of World War II. They had no military operations. We have the government documents through Barry Greenwood's research between 2 generals that stated we had no planes up at the time, despite the fact there were erroneous initial radio broadcasts suggesting it might have been. We only had 45 planes guarding the entire West Coast at the time. And the generals very, very clearly stated we did not dispatch the planes, although they were fueled and ready, because they thought that this solitary object might have been a reconnaissance plane with the vanguard of the assault yet to come. And they stated we did not want to prematurely deploy our planes and have them half out of fuel when the invasion actually hit.
Again, this is so shortly after Pearl Harbor. Their thinking was absolutely understandable.
Absolutely. But that's why I love looking back at it through the lens of history, Peter, because it's interesting. When you look at the government assessment in the documents, again, courtesy of Barry Greenwood's research, they state that it didn't appear to be a plane because it was moving too slow. They thought it might be a balloon, and in fact, there was 1 or 2 weather balloons shot down during this melee that occurred over Los Angeles and the surrounding area. But the interesting thing is the object came in off the coast, moved inland, disappeared off Long Beach, and about 20 minutes later, the same or similar object returned, each time getting peppered with anti-aircraft rounds. It's unusual flight characteristics for a balloon. And if it wasn't Japanese planes, it wasn't American planes, then what was it?
That is the big question, isn't it? Okay, there we go again.
This was a great opportunity. That was in McMinnville, Oregon.
Yes, the great festival and conference.
Wonderful people in McMinnville. I really had a great time there. And There was another photo I think you had up just for a split second. That was another great event. Hewlett, Wyoming. We had some of the best people.
Oh my gosh!
Wyoming. And
wow.
that was the Devil's Tower UFO event that we had a few years ago. And I have to tell you, it's the Hewlett, Wyoming, some of the nicest down-to-earth people I could ever meet. They welcomed myself, and you can see Lee there. You can see Chris O'Brien, Mark D'Antonio, Alejandro Rojas, Micah Hanks. We all were just Karen Braird. We just all had a wonderful time there. And they just, the hospitality, I mean, true down-home hospitality.
What a lineup. When did this one take place?
This, I believe, was in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. Wow. I get a little thrown off on years because of the last 2 years of COVID, but I believe it was 2018.
It's all one big year.
It's one big blur. And there's John. There's John Alexander. That was at the 2012 Ozark UFO conference, and that was the first opportunity where we met. I had just concluded my triangular UFO lecture. And as you know, Peter, I'm speaking to the choir here. You get off the stage and you're inundated with people with questions.
Sure.
And as I always tell people, it was so funny. I'm standing and I'm surrounded by all these people, and I'm trying to address questions as best I can. And I see this tall, white-haired gentleman weaving his way from one far end of the lecture hall to the other. And he finally comes up to me. And of course, I knew John Alexander by reputation.
Sure.
And he put his hand out and he just said, I just want to say that's one of the damn finest lectures I've heard of UFO conferences in years. And we actually hung out the rest of the weekend. And I was really impressed with John and his sobriety with regard to the subject, if I can use that term. I had some preconceived ideas about John, but as I got to know John, I was really impressed the more I got to know him. And many people label him a skeptic, which if you read his book, he's not a skeptic by any means. As I like to say, he just has a really good BS detector when it comes to the subject and people. But long story short, he was very interested in my research. And I thought, if John Alexander's interested in my research, I must be doing something right. And at that same conference, I had like 5 people come up to me and they said they wanted a copy of my book. I didn't say I wrote a book. I never intimated I was working on a book, but it was based on those people coming up to me and then John's interest that made me decide on the way home, flying home to Albuquerque, that maybe I should start putting pen to paper.
Maybe. And there is something about witness drawings that is so special to me. I taught painting and drawing for many years. This was something that came up repeatedly with Bud, both of us trained artists, when a layperson, in the sense that they are not a trained artist, has a sighting that is profound enough or that they want to share and they're asked to do a drawing or they do it on their own, they're putting everything they can into it to try to recreate to the best of their memory what they perceived. And Absolutely. It doesn't have to be, a great piece of draftsmanship. This is the stuff that dreams are made of. Tell us about this particular witness drawing, if you would.
Yeah, I believe this is from Patapsco State Park, which I think might be in New York, if I'm not mistaken. But this was one of many from my book. So sometimes I lose temporal track of which one's from which case. But this was, I believe, from 1978. So again, it was a precursor to the Westchester sightings. And I like this one because, Peter, this one shows, the quintessential equilateral triangle, but it also on the right shows this one with a panel of windows. Yes. And if you can see, there's something in the window on the far right.
That's right.
Many witnesses from all over the globe have sent me similar sketches where they describe this panel of windows that was illuminated from the inside.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really interesting that we have another commonality. Again, many people think these might be military, and they could be. I certainly don't know definitively. But it's interesting that we have these large observation windows on these aircraft or UFOs. Yeah. This is one, actually, I believe this one was from Wales, 1983. And I'm in touch with the group, actually. In fact, I'll be speaking tomorrow afternoon with one of the researchers in Wales, in Swansea. And they had an incredible series of sightings in 1983, January of 1983. There's a documentary being worked on currently, and it's focused on what they call the quote unquote night of the triangles. And multiple witness sightings. If you want to use the analogy, it's basically the Welsh version of Westchester, if I can make that statement. But hundreds of witnesses to this event, and the SUFON group, Swansea UFO Network, I believe it is, they're tracking down many of these witnesses from decades ago and putting all this testimony together and really doing a retrospective analysis of what took place.
The next witness drawing is particularly compelling for reasons that are obvious.
Yes, this is another one from the UK. This was, I believe, also around the 1980s, and just shows you a large structured object. And that's another important thing. I mean, clearly you see structure there, detail. And many people will state, well, people could just be seeing three lights. They in their mind, they formulate a triangle. And I'll be honest with you, many people, I think, do. I think there have been many UFO reports of a trio of lights that seem to be independent of one another. And our mind does, as skeptics rightly point out, our mind does try to find patterns or fill in the blanks.
Absolutely.
But many of the accounts, like this one, the people describe the object moving, and they can literally see the stars being blotted out as the object moves overhead.
Yes. And I mean, this is the very definition of unambiguous.
Yeah, this gives you a pretty good idea of what I'm talking about. And many of these, you can see that in that graphic where it's just skimming the rooftops. Many of the witnesses, even in Westchester, they described this, where it was just
very low.
The tops of the trees.
Exactly. And again, having heard once in my life, and I can tell you it was February 18th, 1988, looking into the Rendlesham Forest, only a matter of 100 yards or so from the perimeter of RAF Bentwaters on my very first visit there, UFO activity and the sounds that were coming, I hope from the nearby farms, of animals reacting, I was able to capture on tape, and they still haunt me to this day.
Unbelievable. Yeah, this is a great one. This is another example of why it's important to do archival work. This is just a very small cropped image taken from a UFO report form from the late 1960s. Now, what's important about this is this was one of the UFO study group of Greater St. Louis, which was actually the precursor to MUFON. John Schuessler and Walt Andrus lived very close to the St. Louis area and used to frequent the meetings, and they were pivotal members of this early organization.
Yeah,
I received a collection of this material, and quite literally, Peter, and I can't tell you how many times I've gotten calls like this. I received a call from Walter Palmer, who's, I believe, now deceased, and Spence Walling from the St. Louis Study Group. And they said, Dave, we have all this material, and our wives are telling us if we don't get rid of this by the weekend, they're going to throw it out. So I went and loaded up two SUVs full of historical newspapers, reports, newsletters. And this is just one of many UFO sighting report forms. Now, what's of interest to this, and as a researcher, this one really intrigued me. This was from the late 1960s, and this object was reported within 1 to 2 miles of Scott Air Force Base in southern Illinois. What's of interest to that is fast forward January 5th, 2000. We had a triangular object reported by police officers from neighboring municipalities within 1 to 2 miles of Scott Air Force Base, describing this exact object, and in some cases describing windows on the side, as you see here. But this was a report that was collected in the late 1960s. What are the odds that someone in the future is going to fabricate a story that falls along that same narrative?
Well, if you have your time machine up and ready to go, it's really not a problem. And what a silly question to ask, with time technology being what it is for us.
Absolutely. Oh, and this image, this is just one of the many Albuquerque area, New Mexico television news segments that I've done. This was touching on my Farmington research from the famous Farmington Flying Saucer Armada 3 broad daylight sightings of hundreds of flying saucers or flying discs flying individually as well as in formation in the sky over Farmington and around Farmington.
Gosh.
And this is actually one of the witnesses who, unless I haven't been updated, is still alive. He's the only surviving witness mentioned in the March 18th Farmington Daily Times newspaper regarding this incident. He's in his 90s. His name is Mr. Marler Webb. He was a private pilot for many years. He owned a number of banks. He's a successful businessman in Farmington, New Mexico today. I was able to track him down and get him to sit down. I've interviewed him at his place of business, his home, gotten to know him very well, and have interviewed him and had him look back on this and been able to share information that he was unaware of that I collected from other witnesses. And so it was really interesting to be able to touch base with Marlowe and have that connection to that historic case from 1950. And I also tracked down this gentleman. This is Virgil Riggs. Virgil was, I believe, in the third grade in 1950 in the neighboring town of Aztec, New Mexico. Virgil recalls seeing these objects moving in formation. He said they were lined up like double six dominoes, if you can imagine those dots in that arrangement. But he said in some cases they went from horizon to horizon as they moved across the sky. And they would see these when they were at recess, standing outside the schoolyard, and they saw multiple overflights of these objects, whatever they were.
Wow.
And this is actually from Wyoming, the Hewlett, Wyoming. And I'm talking. And we're talking about the famous photo. And in this particular case, what I was illustrating is that this is the image from the original undoctored negative. Wow. The image I have, the image that you see on the internet consistently, has been doctored. It's been enhanced so the photo would translate better into newsprint.
Of course.
So when people use that photo forensically, they're doing a disservice to themselves and others. As I state in my lectures, the only bit of information we can use as far as imagery is the original undoctored negative, which resides at the photo archive at the Los Angeles Times.
You know, for a split second when I brought this up, I almost said, David, would you move your hand? and I'll leave that alone.
And actually, Peter, if you can go back to that just for a moment, what I'm illustrating there is the fact that many skeptics say that there is no object, that it's simply artifact created by the convergence of these spotlights. I have another photograph taken that morning, which shows a convergence of searchlights where they're intersecting and then continuing on. Yeah. What I'm showing there, if you can see my finger, and if you follow that straight line to the right, what I'm showing is that there is a beam of light emanating from the object.
Yes.
And the intensity is greater at the object, and then it dissipates as it moves away. However, my arm is blocking it. If you follow that straight line, it would extend to a light source too distant from the object. What we're actually seeing there is a reflected beam from one of the searchlights coming up and hitting the object, whatever it is.
Sakes. How interesting. I was never aware of that.
There's a lot you can gather from the original negative that you don't from the doctored version.
Again, photo analysis is a very different thing now than it was back in the analog days, a very different science. On a lay level, for the most crude hoaxes, I remember my first mentor, the great Coleman von Kvetski, a staff officer, a Hungarian military. Basically, he was in charge of all photo reconnaissance and audio visual education for the Hungarian army during the war, showing me a faked UFO photo, late 70s, where under a 10-power glass, you could see the edge of the paper where the scissor had cut it out. A very different level of analysis than you have to deal with in digital fakes.
I love the fact you bring up Coleman von Kvetski, because I actually have much of his original material here in the collection.
Oh.
I acquired Antonio Huneeus's collection, and of course,
God.
Coleman was one of his mentors. And so in collecting Antonio's material, much of Coleman von Kvetski's material, in fact, I have a whole 4-drawer file cabinet full of Coleman's material.
I know that file cabinet. I visited him many times in his Queens, New York apartment. Antonio and I started out together within a year of each other. He is my oldest comrade in the work of contemporary age,
Yes.
and Coleman was for both of us, our very first mentor. And because of Coleman, who asked us to act as editors on
Yeah.
his so-called blue memorandum that ended up, in the archives for the 1978 United Nations event,
Right.
that our friend Lee Spiegel was behind.
Absolutely.
Sir Eric Gary of Grenada. Um, I I have a very good size archive that I collected over the years of things Coleman gave me, but
Oh,
you have
excellent.
the mother lode. Oh my gosh,
Well,
that's
and
wonderful.
it interesting you bring him up because one of the highlights from his collection, he had a black and white glossy photo of the Battle of LA taken from the original negative.
There you go.
And as you know, that was early pioneering work back in
Yeah.
the 70s for him to acquire that.
Coleman is unfairly kind of lost to UFO history to a degree. He's
He,
seen as a footnote where he was, I mean, in his native country of Hungarian, he was considered a national hero for
I
his
completely
UFO
agree.
work, and the Manx Agreement in Germany.
Yes.
European ufology owes that man a huge debt. And when he died late in his 80s, I thought, he lived to be like 89 or something. I'm not going to mourn him. And I remember going to the service and just bursting into tears. He
Well,
was one tough son of a gun.
and I will tell you, Peter, since he was a friend and mentor for you, when I get these collections, I don't disperse them. In other words, I have a file cabinet that is the Antonio Huneeus / Coleman von Kvetschke collection. I have other collections like that. And the point is not to just honor the material, but to honor the memory of those
Yes.
researchers.
And are you in contact with Antonio these days?
No, he's very difficult to get a hold of.
Yeah.
The best person that has been in touch on a semi-regular basis, Alejandro, exactly.
Yeah. We were truly very close at one time, and I realize that he is, more in seclusion now, but I'm delighted that he was thoughtful enough to give you that archive. I will give you one footnote in terms of just the goofy paranormal world that occasionally rears its head in UFO studies. My late sister Helen, in the 70s, had your classic 5-floor walk up Lower East Side, 150-year-old New York City apartment flat, again on East 6th Street, New York. And directly, slightly diagonally across the street on the same floor, just a year or so before I met him, was Antonio's apartment. You could look in each other's windows. And from the time that we met and he became good
Incredible.
friends with Helen, we could wave. And
Incredible.
what are the odds? Anyway, I'll leave that one alone for the moment.
And speaking of Helen, I just want to mention I was just watching again. I digitized my entire VHS library about a year or so ago. I was just watching the Geraldo episode with you and her just the other day. I was sharing that with someone.
Yeah, that was quite a day with Bud, of course, and Geraldo,
Yes.
who, if you're listening, I think you're a superficial jerk, but at least, we did a good show with him, and Helen looked terrific on that show in her forest green Ann Taylor leather suit and her fire engine red hair. And
Yep.
he introduced her as Helen Wells. Her
Right.
performing name was Helen Wheels. And when one of us gently corrected him, said, "Oh, I was thinking of Mary Wells," who, of course, was one of the great soul singers. So we let that go. But David, it's almost hard to believe, but we are coming right into our end time right now.
Oh, my goodness.
And it is time to sign off. Thank you so much for being here. Next week's guest, Oni Pagan, great scientist, great biologist. Drunk flies and stone dolphins, one of the topics of discussion next week. David Marler, stay well. And ladies and gentlemen, be kind to each other. Stand up for what you believe in. And we'll see you next week.